All right. Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. We just missed Matt stretching, but whatever. I'm SKOL Joel along with Matt right there, the number one Kirk fan in the world, actually number two behind Joe Spinoza. You ever seen Joe Spinoza? You know who that is?
I feel like I've seen him on Twitter.
He's like the biggest Kirk fan you'll ever find. It's funny.
I would put myself at 3. Number 2 would be Luke Ellis. He's my friend. Huge Kirk fan. Was very devastated to hear the news, as we all were. So we're wearing our Kirk merch,
I've got my
obviously.
Kirko chains shirt on.
Obviously,
although
if there's
I'm gonna
Atlanta
hate.
merch that comes out, I mean, we'll definitely have to cop it. I'm not sure if you saw the tweet or not. It was shared on Instagram through our Instagram chat, but the Falcons training facility is like a mile and a half away from a Kohl's.
Kirk will just live in Kohl's.
I mean, you think of it,
Swimming in Kohl's cash.
not only getting the money he did through negotiation, but then to pick Atlanta not only because it's close to Julie's family, it's close to a Kohl's, and his Kohl's cash can carry over. I mean, his agent's going to the Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah, Mike McCartney deserves to be a Hall of Fame agent. Him, Scott Boras is in the agent Hall of Fame. I mean, there's a lot more that
to negotiate a deal, the Kirk Cousins deal, the 4 years, 180, 100 mil guaranteed coming off a torn Achilles, Hall of Fame worthy negotiating. I wonder what was said. But another thing I thought was, man, Arthur Blank must really hate Desmond Ridder, that he will way overspend to get a guy.
So here we are on day 2 of NFL free agency.
Still
Best time of the year for a football
happen,
fan.
but
So here we are looking at yesterday. They signed 3 guys, and then today they've
at
done
midnight,
a few more moves as well, and we are going to get into all of that right now. So as we start, the first thing, I guess, to kind of talk about, you weren't on last night. Sam O was on. If anyone's watching this, I want to see like a raw discussion of right after everything fell last night. Go check out last night's episode. Me and Sam O had a good hour-long talk about all this stuff. But obviously the big headline is that Kirk Cousins has signed, or hasn't signed, but he's agreed to a 4-year deal with the Falcons. And for Kirk Cousins, there's only one thing he can say, and here it is.
You like that? You like that?
Yeah,
I like it for Kirk. I wish it was a deal in Minnesota, but obviously that's way too much money to stay here.
So
good
I loaded
him.
some Kirk sounders into StreamYard here.
That's how we've won all year, team, right? Hey, you held them to 20 points, man. Yes, you gave us a chance at the end. I got 3 words for you. You like that?
So now we can play things whenever we want. So that's that. We talked about it last night. The structure came out then last night, even though it kind of did already. It was 4 years. It's maximum 180 million, so that's 45 per year. 100 million of it guaranteed. 90 of that 100 is in the first 2 years. That means the first 2 years are fully guaranteed. That'll, I believe, be his 11th straight year. Will be 2025 under a fully guaranteed deal, which is just crazy. Then he has 10 million in guarantees in 2026. So me and Sam O both talked about it last night, and pretty much from my personal standpoint, as a voice on here before, I like Kwesi's move to put a line in the sand and say, no, we're not gonna go in and we're not gonna spend too much. And clearly the Falcons were willing to spend more, and Kwesi said, no, we're willing to move on and we're willing to take away the security blanket. So I like Kwesi's move overall. I mean, we're going to get into a lot of this stuff here. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, Vikings GM, in my opinion, for my philosophies, has been cooking these past 2 days. He's been doing a wonderful job. So that's my initial takeaway.
He's made some good moves to this point. Still a long way to go in free agency, and there's still a draft to happen. Long way to go.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's that. Then we talked about how the Vikings are obviously in the market for a quarterback. Were they going to go? Obviously, they were probably going to go with a bridge guy. Who are they going to go with since Russell Wilson was off the board? Then Gardner Minshew went off the board. Then as me and him were filming Brissett went off the board, I think, live during ours. And the options were kind of dwindling down, but we found out last night at about midnight Central Time. I just happened to look at my phone as I was rolling over and moving it from the little spot I keep it on to my bed, and I saw that the Vikings signed Mr. Sam Darnold to a 1-year deal. It says worth up to $10 million, but I think it is pretty much a 1-year, $10 million deal. A little interesting on the wording, whatever. But so yeah, that was kind of a surprise. I think this is just a theory, but I feel like Kwesi did that at midnight because he was fearing the backlash he'd get from fans for doing it. So that's why he did it so late at night and not at 6.
Give himself a few hours before he woke up to the angry messages. But yeah, I mean, definition of a bridge quarterback at his stage of the career for Sam Darnold. Vikings obviously are in a need for a quarterback, and this is one of the best guys available. But obviously they need to draft a quarterback in this draft. I don't think Sam Darnold is going to start the whole year.
So Viking fans can fear the idea of Sam Darnold, but the thing is, like you just said, he's a bridge quarterback. He's not going to be your guy for the next 3 years or whatever. He's going to start a maximum 1 year before they move off of him. And I'll just pull up some stats on him. So like we said, it's a 1-year, $10 million deal. The Vikings have $28.5 million from Kirk's previous contract with Minnesota. They have that dead cap that's set to lock in tomorrow at 3:00 when the league year opens. And that money can't be moved, so they're going to have to eat that money. In his career, he's played for 3 different teams. He's played for the Jets, Panthers, and Niners last year. He's completed about 60% of his passes, 63 touchdowns to 56 interceptions. He hasn't been good by any means, but he's not going to make your team go 0-17. You're just looking for a guy to go out there and bridge to your new young quarterback. So I like this decision. I like how it's a $10 million deal. I mean, he's the definition of a bridge. What more could you ask for? Honestly, that's why I know there were some Viking fans that talked about, like, obviously this was pre-Baker Mayfield back to the Bucs, but there were a couple of Viking fans I would see around Twitter that would say, well, if they can't sign Kirk, just bring in Baker Mayfield. But Baker Mayfield's not a bridge quarterback. He is your next guy for the next couple of years. And we just saw that contract netted $33 million so that it wouldn't be cost effective at all. It just wouldn't make sense. So people can disagree, and that's okay, but I will stand behind the Sam Darnold signing. And for what they want to do, I think they did a good job. Good job, Kwesi.
Yeah, he's shown some flashes, but I think is more negative, more lowlights than highlights in his film. Maybe getting into the Kevin O'Connell system might help him, but he won't be around long term.
He's thrown in his career, he's attempted just under 2,000 passes. And I think one of the things I talked about last night with Sam O is that we talked about, obviously this was pre-Sam Darnold, but we also threw out the possibility of Trey Lance. And Trey Lance is intriguing, but there's a difference. It's Trey Lance has been a bust, but he has hardly any playing. So there's nothing we can like base him off of. He's only played a handful of games in his career, whereas Sam Darnold, obviously Sam Darnold hasn't been great, but he has played 66 games in his career, significantly more than Trey Lance has played. So even though Darnold hasn't been good, he has experience at least, and that's one thing they can bet on that with Trey Lance they wouldn't have been able to bet on. So I will say I respect them for that, and I'm sure that factored into the decision. If you threw in Trey Lance, it would in a way be like starting a rookie quarterback, which is what they're obviously trying to avoid. In a perfect world, though, Sam Darnold would start 0 games for the Vikings. Again, that's in a perfect world, though, so there's no obviously guarantee or not even an expectation that's how it's going to go. But if things went perfectly, it would be rookie quarterback to be determined, whether it's J.J. McCarthy, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, whoever it is. In a perfect world, they would be the starter week 1, and it wouldn't be Sam Darnold, and he would just be the backup. But that's a perfect world. Another interesting thing I was thinking about this morning was the Vikings quarterback room right now. So the Vikings Obviously, they've agreed to terms with Darnold, and they'll be able to sign him starting tomorrow at 3. Kirk is, it appears, obviously going to be leaving. They still have Nick Mullins and
Jaron Hall.
I don't know why I was blanking on his name.
He's easy to forget.
Little interesting is this morning I was just thinking about what are they going to do with those guys? Because the presumption is obviously that they're going to draft a rookie this year. And then that would probably make him, if it was a first-round pick, I would say that person would probably be your backup quarterback right away. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they're probably not going to be your starter, but they're probably going to be your backup. And Nick Mullins has been the backup. So, I mean, we could look at his contract here, but I'd almost think, do they really have a purpose? He doesn't really have a market. No team would probably trade for him because he doesn't have any value anymore.
Yeah.
They might just be better off cutting him because to me, Nick Mullins doesn't really serve a purpose anymore.
I would say if it was between cutting Mullins and Jaron Hall, it would be cutting Mullins. He's just older. Jaron Hall's got some youth, and there's still something there potentially. He would probably just serve as the emergency quarterback, kind of like what Dobbs did towards the end of the year.
Mm-hmm. So Nick Mullins has, okay, this would work actually pretty well. Nick Mullins, he signed a 2-year deal with the Vikings. They traded for him, I believe it was 2021 maybe, or 22.
That sounds right.
Whichever one it was.
Somewhere in that time frame.
It was the preseason. It was when Kellen Mond wasn't working like they thought. I think it must have been 22 because I think Kevin O'Connell had Kellen Mond for 1 year and quickly decided it wasn't just a regime problem. It was a player problem. Because, yeah, it was Kellen Mond and probably wouldn't have been Heineke. Heineke would have been gone by then.
Yeah.
Who would their other quarterback have been back then? Oh, it was probably Mannion, I bet.
Sean Mannion.
I was going to say Sean Mannion, I bet, and Kellen Mond. They realized neither of them were competent enough to be a backup. So they pulled off a trade for Nick Mullins. It was for, I think it was for sure a 7th. Maybe it was a 6th and 7th or just a 7th. Just low capital. Then so he has a 2-year contract right now. He played last year was the first year. This is the second year. He has a dead cap of $375,000 and a cap hit of $2.2 million approximately this year. So that would save them about $2.1 million if they got rid of him, which to me almost kind of seems like a no-brainer at this point, but we'll just have to see how it plays out. But I mean, that to me seems like a pretty easy $2 million to save. So We'll see. And then Jaron Hall, I mean, it was just interesting to think about it because he was going to be the project quarterback, but now he was probably not ever going to be the starting franchise guy. But if they bring in, say, J.J. McCarthy, then what purpose does he also serve? I would like to keep him as a third string, but
exactly
in your long-term future, he doesn't really have a purpose.
Yeah, whenever his deal expires, you just let him go.
Mm-hmm. So then another thing, I'll throw up the let Kwesi Cook will we just talk about this kind of stuff since he's been doing a good job of that. Another thing that I talked about last night with Sam was that now that they've moved on from Kirk Cousins, to me it feels, and fans can disagree with me and that's okay, it feels like they're moving away from mediocrity because they understand that in order to win a championship, you have to take risks. And to me, another thing I think is that, this is just a personal opinion, is that if they wait and draft, say, Bo Nix, Michael Penix in the second or third, to me, that also feels like you're settling for mediocrity, and I'll explain that too.
I don't think Michael Penix would be available come second round.
Probably not, but if he were to fall, that seems like Bo Nix is the more likely candidate. Or, I mean, you said Joe Milton. I don't know what
Joe Milton would be a middle, probably a day.
I don't know that.
Depending on how his combine looked, he's drawing interest, but I would say he's more of a day 3 pick.
Yeah. So with that said, the philosophy I've kind of had in mind now is they've decided they're willing to move on from Kirk Cousins. If they're going to get their quarterback that they want to be the future of this team, go big or go home. Trade up if you need. Identify your guy. And I'll explain why I think I'll explain what I was saying about how it feels like settling for mediocrity, which isn't necessarily true, but
We have a saying at UTVS, it's don't settle. So
Don't settle.
the
Never settle.
Vikings now need to apply that. And I feel like that's what Kwesi's doing. He's not settling. He's done settling for 7 and 10 seasons and wild card exits. He wants to try to do something to, put the Vikings back on the mountaintop.
Oh, yeah. And what I was going to say is that, again, if they draft a quarterback in, say, the 3rd round, it doesn't mean that quarterback's not going to become their franchise guy. And if they trade up into, say, the top 3 and select someone, that doesn't mean it's a guarantee that that person's going to work either. None of this is guaranteed, but what I'm speaking on is probabilities. If you trade up and identify your guy in the 1st round, you're more probable for them to work out. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's a higher probability for that to work. Because, I think we talked last week about there have been some mid-round quarterbacks that have worked out, but just look every year and over the past, say, 10 years at all the mid-round quarterbacks that have been drafted, how many of them have worked? Not a whole lot overall. Like we've said, Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins was a 4th-round pick. Dak, I think, was 4th as well. Tom Brady was a 6th. Purdy is working right now. So like there are examples of it working. So it's not saying
I guess technically they attempted with Sam Howell. It feels like Washington's going to move on from him.
So it's not to say that it never works to draft a quarterback in those not second, but like 3rd, 4th, 5th round, that area, and then they become your franchise guy. It's not that it never happens. It's just that if you draft someone higher up, you have a higher probability of it working. That's more what it is.
They have a longer leash.
Yes, I think that's what I think that's what he's going to see too. Again, he comes from an analytics background. He's not a football guy. He comes from that Wall Street background, and I think he's going to think about that, and he's going to understand that nothing is ever guaranteed. It's just that the probability is higher for them to work and hit if you do something like that, even though it might not. It's a numbers game. It's a probability standpoint for that. So that's just kind of the philosophy I've adopted recently, is that if you draft or if you see your guy, go get it. And this is another thing we talked about last night too. Sam O he's the resident Michigan fan of this podcast. So we talked a little about JJ McCarthy last night, and some Viking fans kind of cry a little bit thinking about the fact that the Vikings could take him at 11 or that they could trade up for him. And I think you're one of those people.
Yep.
So with that said, I asked him, and you can watch back to last night. I asked him a little about why should fans not fear. He's a JJ McCarthy stan, understandably, because he's a Michigan fan. So I asked him why fans shouldn't fear. And he said the traits of JJ McCarthy are very good. He hasn't always shown it, but he said bet on traits. And I thought that was really interesting, because to me, some of the hate that McCarthy has gotten has been that just Michigan. I'll say I haven't watched a whole lot of college football in my life, and I haven't really been super into it. But from what I know, people tend to complain about JJ McCarthy because Michigan wasn't a super pass-heavy offense, and he didn't throw the ball a whole lot, which is a fair argument to make. But I think at the Combine, I don't know, were you watching the Combine really or not really? Because I wasn't really.
I saw highlights. I know he had the 3rd hardest thrown ball, which I think is a stupid thing to test at the Combine.
I think it's useless.
You can throw the football over 60 yards. He threw a go route that was pretty nice, but he did miss on an out route. But I didn't watch too much, but those were some of the main highlights I saw from him.
Because, yeah, it's not like a game situation, but if you're believing in it, like Sam O he said he believes in betting on traits. And I think I'll say that JJ McCarthy, it seems like he did a good job showing off his traits at the Combine and why he deserves to be a high draft pick and why he could put it all together. Not saying that he will, but that he could potentially do that. Also, I think this is what I heard from the Combine is that JJ McCarthy throwing to receivers did very well. He only really had one bad throw, and it sounded like the only bad throw he had, the receiver actually ran the wrong route. So it sounded like it wasn't even really his fault that it happened. Obviously, sometimes that happens, but it sounds like he did a pretty good job. Another point I made last night is I know you've talked about how you're not the biggest JJ McCarthy at 11 or trade up fan. Then the point I had is that we are just fans. We are just watching games. We're just watching tape. These scouts know 100 times more than we do. And I'll say that if the Vikings trade up to 5 and draft JJ McCarthy, I'm still going to stand up and clap for them because they know way more than I'm ever going to know. They've scouted him day in and day out, and they know what they're in for. So that's just kind of what I think. You don't have to agree with me on that, but that's why no matter what, even if they do that, I'm not going to be mad if they do something like that because I have trust in Kevin and the scouts here that they have their eyes open, and I have trust that they trust the guy they identify. So you don't have to agree with me there, but that's just what I think about that is I'm not going to be mad if they got JJ McCarthy at 5 or something because they identified that to be their guy, and I'm going to stand behind that.
I like that. I like that philosophy. Well, the Panthers did that exact same thing with Bryce Young. They traded away their best receiver, multiple first-round draft picks to get Bryce Young. And obviously in year one that didn't work out. There's still time. The Panthers are a dumpster fire. But I can tell you in one instance where that hasn't worked. And granted, the Vikings are a better ran organization than the Panthers. So I'm just saying it doesn't work. But obviously you look at the structure of the organization and it's completely different. Whereas Bryce Young is getting drafted into a situation where his number one target's Adam Thielen.
Yeah.
Whereas a potential you trade up for a quarterback, you're going to draft, he's going to come into a situation with Justin Jefferson. Hopefully the contract talks pan themselves out. TJ Hawkinson sometime when he comes back within the beginning of the season. Addison. And obviously the new man in the backfield, Aaron Jones. So he's got weapons. He's got a decent O-line. It's not great. There can be improvements, obviously. But it's a way better situation. So yes, you can identify a guy, but when you do that, you need to make sure there's a structure in place, not just give up the best things you have for a guy that is, I guess, not proven.
That was an excellent point you just made. And yes, both of those comparisons obviously work. They're not necessarily apples to apples though, but it does definitely make sense that
if you're going to do that, you better have like a good structure for your team around you.
Yeah, and you just kind of laid out.
I think the Vikings do have that. Sorry to keep cutting you off.
Oh, no, it's all right. I was just going to say, you just laid that out perfectly. I think that's the big difference between the Vikings and Carolina last year is that the Panthers were kind of setting the Panthers were setting him up for failure.
I don't know how Jacksonville did Trevor, but I'm going to shut up now. But
the Vikings are setting up their guy for success. They have weapons, like you just said, whereas the Panthers were setting up pretty much Bryce Young for failure because they had no one on their team other than Bryce Young and Brian Burns and Adam Thielen, who's 32? How old is he? Something like that. I don't know.
I think 32 is right. I'll quick look.
Let's see. It was 33. I was close.
He was he a 1,000-yard receiver last year? Yep.
Yeah,
2014.
Barely, but it was a 1,000-yard receiver.
On that Panthers team, that's saying something.
It is. So I don't know if I know any receivers on the Panthers outside of Adam Thielen last year, to be honest.
I follow the Panthers well. I know DJ Chark, Terrence Marshall, Laviska Shenault.
Oh, I didn't know he played for there. I just remembered him with Jacksonville.
Yeah, I know they had a big contract when they signed Miles Sanders, and that did not work. They can't even move him because there's no interest within anyone unless the team wants to take a risk on him. And Chuba Hubbard was always their guy, and they drafted him. So, and they did spend $100 million, like a 3-year, 4-year, $100 million on an offensive lineman and Robert Hunt, which was an extreme overpay. But they identified a guy they needed, but it's a lot of money, and it's going to take away from developing and getting better at other positions. And they don't even have a first-round pick. So it's still a bad rebuild going. And then they tried Brian Burns, and they don't even get a first-round pick for him.
Yeah. Also, you want to know what I heard this morning is that the Vikings were in on Brian Burns.
Makes sense. I mean, he's a good pass rusher. I mean, they weren't asking for a first-round pick, so I mean, the Vikings could have, if they really wanted him, they could have thrown in a couple of years down the line a first-round pick because I mean, Brian Burns is worth it.
You'd
Pair
think
him on the same line with Jonathan Greenland. That would have been a nice pass rush.
Another thing we talked a little about last night, this doesn't necessarily pertain to the Vikings, but we did talk a little about this just because it's interesting football stuff. It almost feels to me the Bears screwed up the Justin Fields trade market. To me, they could still trade him for.
They can still trade him. They're going to trade him.
Yeah,
but what team needs a quarterback right now?
I mean,
which is a team that is potentially going to draft a quarterback, say we'll take a shot on Fields.
Yeah, because
Washington, does New England say we'll take Fields?
I was going to say Brissett just signed with the Commanders.
And that's more
so it seems like they're setting themselves up for a rookie then.
He signed with the Patriots.
Brissett did? Okay, then his Wikipedia pages might be wrong.
He was a Commander.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It is the Patriots. The Commanders signed someone, though, I feel like. Unless I'm down.
They signed Austin Eckler yesterday.
Oh, 3 hours ago, they signed Marcus Mariota. I did not know that till right now.
They did do that too, but
I mean, that might not
really makes no sense.
Anything, but
because if they still have Sam Howell, then they must. Yeah, interesting. Let's see what the vision is there.
I was just gonna say the only team that has like no one whatsoever is the Broncos, and Sean Payton will not work with Justin Fields. I can tell that. They won't see
Payton. It's kind of like what Sean Payton has a certain quarterback that I think like the Drew Brees build. He can't really do much.
And it's not Justin Fields, so
he can't do much. What will he do with a mobile quarterback?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's not to say that no team will trade for Fields because I'm sure someone will.
I think there is a market for Justin Fields. It's just
they lost out on the market right now. They lost out on the max they could have got for him. They could have got probably a day 2 pick, and they missed out on I think that opportunity. If they would have traded him
to Atlanta, to Pittsburgh,
what they should have done was as soon as Kirk to Atlanta came out, they should have immediately dialed up some teams and said, all right, we could say he's maybe probably the second best quarterback available behind Kirk. And they should have just called up teams right then and said, you want him? We're offering you. But they, to our knowledge, didn't. And it might come back to bite them a bit. But we'll see. It's just, you never know. I was also going to say, what was I going to say? I was going to say something else about that, I think, too. Oh, yeah, it's that his contract situation is weird, too, because he's got like 2 years left of cheap or at least semi-cheap, and then someone's going to have to pay him, and no one's going to want to do that because why would you do that when you could just get a rookie instead and have 4 or 5 years?
Unless they just want to keep him on that cheap deal, but then not re-sign him.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we talked a little. Me and Sam talked a little about Justin Fields to the Vikings, but we both shut it down right away because it was never going to logically make that much sense. So that's kind of that. Other things around is that last night, even before anything, the Vikings made a lot of moves on defense yesterday. They've been doing some offensive stuff today. Yesterday was defense. They brought in former Texans pass rusher Jonathan Grenard. By the way, I think me and him both said we heard pronunciation is officially Grenard. You think it's like Greenard or something? It is Grenard. Jonathan Grenard is how it's said. He is. I'll find some more information about him. He had 12.5 sacks, I believe, last year. He played 4 years in Houston. He was a 3rd-round pick there, so he's coming off his rookie deal. I believe, if I remember right, I think he's 27. So he's 2-3 years younger than Danielle Hunter is. Maybe not quite as good as Danielle Hunter in the right now, but I mean, Danielle's still on the market. Probably not going to come back to the Vikings, but you never know. We'll just have to see. But it was a $19 million per year deal. So it was 4 years. So whatever 19 times 4 would be, that's how much it was. And I'll say I like this move. I mean, in a way, they're kind of betting on upside a little
76.
bit. Okay. So 4 years, 76. I'll say I like this deal. And Danielle would have been good coming back. Well, some of this will change when we see who Danielle signs with and what that contract is. That might change people's opinions on this. But I feel like Danielle could get in the upper 20s, maybe even up to 30. Probably not quite 30, but
I would say
20s.
middle. Let's go with the middle, like 25.
I was going to say between 25 and 30. I feel like he could maybe get something there. And so I like this $19 million per deal. Obviously, he's, like I said, he's not as good as Danielle is right now.
He was productive last year. He had 13 sacks.
Yeah, he was good. I like this a lot. I think it's a good move. And to the Viking fans that wanted to keep Kirk Cousins around, just think about this. You've moved on from Kirk. You have more money in the future. Look at all these guys you can sign. If Kirk Cousins got a, say, 2-year extension for 45 per year, they probably wouldn't have been able to make a signing like this.
I mean, I think Grenard is 3 years younger than Danielle. He could potentially be the next Danielle here in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we've seen over the years the Vikings have had just a history recently of having good pass rushers. Danielle was good. Obviously, their pass rushing as a whole last year wasn't really good, but individual players like him, Jared Allen, Everson Griffin, all those guys. I mean, we could go on and on, but those are just the recent ones that come to mind over the past few years.
If you really wanted a veteran, Chargers are open to trading Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa.
How old is
really
Khalil
within the Vikings
now?
I think he's got to be in his 30s.
He's 33. Just look up how productive has he been lately? Khalil Mack. Let's see if we can find some stats on him.
2023 had 17 sacks.
He had 17 sacks.
Remember, one game was like 6 sacks. So that really inflated his numbers. But even taking that game out of
still 11.
That's still 11 sacks out of one game.
I mean, double-digit sacks is, what you strive for. That's great.
He's a beast. He's a specimen.
Here's his sack totals by year. He's been around since 2014. 4, 15, 11, 10.5, 12.5, 8.5, 9, 6, 8, and 17. So even though overall we can say he's not the same player he really was 5 years ago, he's still
he can be a mentor.
So I would depends how much let's see what Khalil Mack's current contract is. They're not going to trade him, but we can use that at least as a basis for if he were to sign with the Vikings, how much would it be? He is this upcoming year. Okay, his contract is the problem. Last year, he was $16.6 million against the cap. This year, he's 38.5 against the cap, so that's kind of the problem.
That's probably why the Vikings won't trade for him. But it was nice to want. It was nice to think. I just saw a report that said they were open to trading them. So
he's got a dead cap this year of 15. So if they cut him, that would save him $23 million approximately. So I mean, even with a $15 million cap hit, that still makes sense. And the Chargers are an up and coming team, but it's not like they're going to be a Super Bowl contender this year. Probably it'll still be a couple years before they get everything figured out with their with Jim Harbaugh coming in and getting that whole thing squared away. So that's that. Also, the Vikings signed Andrew Van Ginkel. He's got one of the best names in the NFL, and he's got some of the best hair in the NFL as well. He had, I forget how many sacks he had last year. We'll look up some stuff on him. They signed him for, I believe it was 2 years, $20 million or $19 million, something like that. So $9.5, $10 million per year on a 2-year deal. So nice. good deal, I think, for the Vikings. Andrew Van Ginkel, some stats. He's played 5 years with Miami. He had 6 sacks last year, which is the most in his career. He had, 6 sacks. He had an interception last year as well. Pick 6, actually, even better. 8 passes defensed, most in his career. So best year of his career was last year, and it's not a break the bank deal, but it's a nice addition to your pass rushing core to go with Jonathan Grenard. Another thing I've also thought about is originally I was hesitant, but now I wouldn't be opposed to DJ Wanham coming back. If they could get DJ Wanham, he's not going to get a big market with coming off injury, and he hasn't been. I mean, he's been productive, but he hasn't been super productive over his 4 years here. He's probably not going to get a lot of money. I wouldn't be opposed to him coming in as a rotational player, not a starting piece. That's kind of what they tried last year, and it didn't really work out that well. But if he was a rotational piece, I would take DJ Wanham back on a lower end deal. He might not be ready for week 1 anyway, because he got hurt. I think it was toward the end of the year, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that. Also, the Vikings signed former Gophers linebacker Blake Cashman, native of Eden Prairie, Minnesota. He led the Texans in tackles last year. He's played, I believe, for the Jets as well. We'll see some stuff about him. Blake Cashman, he is 27 years old, so he's still a fairly young player too. He's presumably going to be the replacement for Jordan Hicks. They signed him before Jordan Hicks went off the market, but they weren't going to re-sign Jordan Hicks anyway. Jordan Hicks, I believe, went to the Browns, if I remember right, yesterday. So that's that. He's younger than Hicks. I don't remember how old Jordan Hicks was. I looked this up last night, but I already forgot. Not Jordan Hicks baseball.
Jordan Hicks popped up for me.
31. He's 31, so he's 4 years younger than Hicks. And over last year was obviously a more productive player. Last year he had 56 solo tackles, 106 total tackles, by far the most in his career. Up to that point, he had 46, 26, and now 106. His first 3 seasons, he only played 7-4 in 3 games, so I don't know if that's injury or just never got an opportunity. Who knows what it could be. But then, he played 16 games in 2022 and got 26 tackles. 14 games last year with 106 tackles, so be a good inside linebacker. He'll probably be the starting inside linebacker to be paired with Ivan Pace, at least you'd think. And I think that'll help Brian Asamoah becoming a role player as well. He was tried as a starter, didn't really work like they thought it would, but maybe that'll help having a more experienced player and having him get a bit of a breather. He also had 2 sacks last year as well. In his career, he's had 5.5. He had his first interception last year, and it was a return of 2 yards. So good for him. Better than 0. Good for Blake Cashman.
He didn't settle for just the interception. He returned it 2 extra yards.
Mm-hmm. Set his team up. So, the Vikings have been making a lot of moves on defense, and today they made some moves on offense. Obviously, late last night, Sam Darnold, we already talked about that. But this morning, Aaron Jones. So the running back carousel has been quite interesting this offseason. We haven't seen a running back market like this in years, if ever, honestly.
Just in terms of moving teams, I mean, we got Saquon yesterday, went to the Eagles. Earlier today, Derrick Henry went to Baltimore. And Joe Mixon got traded to the Texans. And then Aaron Jones joining the Packers division rival.
So we talked about this last night, me and Sam did, and we talked just a little about the discussion of why haven't the Vikings signed a running back yet? Because obviously we know they need someone, but they haven't done anything since they just got rid of Madison and whatever. And my take was that I was okay with them not signing a running back on the first day. Some of those high-end running backs, yes, they're good players, but I mean, some of them were anywhere in like the $10 to $12 million range. For me, that's out of my range for a running back. That's too much for me.
And
even for Saquon Barkley. His was like,
even though they put in a match for him.
Saquon Barkley, he's a great player. Saquon got 3 years, $37 million, and if I remember right, that's like 13 a year, which I wouldn't. If I was Kwesi, I wouldn't have done that. So I kind of said last night, yes, I would like to sign a vet running back, but not for too much. And to me, that's what Aaron Jones is. Played very well at the end of last year. Played the Vikings at the end of the year, and I mean, we saw him. He ended the year with 5 straight 100-yard games.
That's for my fantasy team.
Let's see how old he is. He's pretty old now, but he's 29.
Yeah,
we've seen running backs fall off.
It's a 1-year deal. Ty Chandler's obviously going to lose some touches, but he's still going to be an important part in that backfield. Given it's going to be Ty Chandler and the Vikings don't draft somebody.
And yeah, he's 29, but it's not like he's going to be pounding the rock every play. If anything, he might even be your 1B. Maybe they'd have Ty Chandler 1A, him 1B. We'll see how it goes. Maybe it's the other way around. Either way, it's not going to be probably 1-2 situation. It's probably going to be a 1A, 1B, I'd think, because they seem to like Ty Chandler at the end of the year.
Yeah, and Ty Chandler isn't the greatest at receiving the ball outside of the backfield or catching the ball. Or at least that's not a developed part of his game, whereas Aaron Jones is a fully developed part of his game. But yeah, I feel like the Packers just gifted him to the Vikings by cutting him. Obviously, they got Josh Jacobs, but the second he was cut, the first thing that came to mind is Minnesota going to get Aaron Jones, and it happened.
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but I think I saw something last night. When they cut Aaron Jones, I looked to see, and then I saw the Vikings had interest. I was wondering, if they're cutting him, you'd think it has to do some with money, not all of it, because obviously they brought in Josh Jacobs. That might have to do some with it.
They wanted to restructure. Sorry.
No, it's all right. You can say whatever.
I was going to say, I don't know if you were going to refer to the tweet, but they asked him to restructure the end of his deal and take like a 50% pay cut on that last year of his deal. And he was like, I'm not doing that. And they're like, all right, we're just going to cut you now.
I saw that. I could be wrong on these numbers, but I think that he was supposed to have $12 million against the Packers cap this year, and that was kind of why they cut him. So when I saw that $12 million figure, I thought, ooh, I don't want to sign Aaron Jones if they're signing him for $12 million. Like, to me, that's just a no. So the cap I kind of made was whatever running back they get, I don't want to go over $8 million. $8 million to me felt like the number, and they got him for 1 year, $7 million. So a little under that, and he's experienced. And yeah,
he still got it.
With the Packers, it also like he wasn't running the ball every play because they had A.J. Dillon as well. So it wasn't just him and only him, but he'll probably get – I'd almost like to think he'd get a few less touches here than he did with the Packers. Maybe not necessarily, but with Ty Chandler, yeah. And Aaron Jones is – I mean, maybe you might have talked about this a little bit ago and I just missed it. He's pretty good in the pass game too. So, and that's what Ty Chandler, we didn't really see him in the pass game a whole lot. Again, our whole sample size with him is pretty small, but we didn't really see much of him in the pass game. And so this is nice. Good addition. Also, I think that just because they have Aaron Jones doesn't mean their problem rushing the ball isn't completely fixed. I think that falls on more than just one thing. It was not just Alexander Madison's fault.
And you got to share up that O-line.
Yes. Some of that had to do with their interior offensive line. Like we talked a little about Reisner. Reisner's good in pass blocking, but he's kind of horrible in run blocking. And that's how he's been his whole career. So, and then, I mean, you have Garrett Bradbury who can't move people because he's being moved every play by huge defensive tackles. So that has to do with some of it. I think some of it, in my opinion, again, not all of it, but some of it has to do on Kevin O'Connell. He was too quick to abandon the run game, in my opinion. He would see something not work, and then he'd just say, all right, we're passing the ball now. And I think that in order to have a successful running game and passing game, you need to have both to complement each other. And sometimes he was too quick to move away from it, and that made the team too one-dimensional. So some of it might have had to do with that. And they also had no screen game whatsoever. So this might help with it now that they have a pass-catching running back who's also a rushing running back. So it's not going to absolve all their problems, but it's going to help. It's a step in the right direction. So that's a good thing. But overall, I mean, philosophy-wise, let Kwesi cook. I think he's doing a fantastic. And not every Viking fan is going to like this, but just for my personal philosophy, for the past how many months on this podcast, I've been talking about what I want to happen, and what I want to happen is pretty much what's happening right now. This is like, if I was the GM, I would be doing a lot of the same things he's doing. So overall, I think that he's doing a good job, and I applaud him for that. And that leads me to say,
You like that? You like that?
oh, I had to throw that in at another point.
Bears signed tight end Gerald Everett.
Oof. Gerald Everett. He played for the Chargers. I know he's been around a couple more. He's been around a bit now. Also, we talked about Irv Smith. You said, or someone said he went to the Chiefs. That was what a move.
Sam Z actually.
Yeah.
Contributing to this podcast.
Then I saw last night that, and I put it in our group chat, that Jalen Reagor, I think it was the Patriots, I think that signed to do one year
with the Patriots. Absolutely, it sounds like
groundbreaking move.
League altering. Obviously, him and Jacoby Brissett are going to create a 1-2 punch. And it sounds like Calvin Ridley is rumored to be going to the Patriots.
Oh, I didn't even know that. So, yeah, we'll just have to kind of see what happens next. So that is that. So yeah, lots of fun is still going to happen. Again, none of the moves they've made outside of the guys they've cut. They also cut Dean Lowry. We didn't really talk about that. There's not much to say. He was pretty unproductive, and they saved like $2 million. And it was kind of a no-brainer move. They also released William Quenku, who spent most of his time on the practice squad. Had some good special teams play in like the preseason, but never was gonna do that much overall. Also, yesterday they did re-sign David Quesenberry and Blake Brandel, and I mean they're just guys kind of. Quesenberry, I mean he started with the Bills, so he's got experience. And it was a 1-year, $2 million deal. So good bargain in my mind for someone that has starting experience. And he's not great, but all you need is a depth guy, and that's what he is. He's just a guy, and good deal. And Blake Brandel, former tackle, moved to guard, and he's not really outstanding either, but he's just a guy, and that's all you need him to be. So it's all right. And then I also saw this morning the Vikings have interest in potentially bringing back Brandon Powell and Troy Dye as well. I mean, Dye's been only a special teams player, so I kind of have no opinion on him. I could care less what they do. But for Brandon Powell, I will say I'm a Brandon Powell supporter. So I would, if it was a cheap deal, I would take Brandon Powell back as a punt returner. And I mean, he wasn't super great in the offense, but he made some good plays. So
obviously, it was a depleted wide receiver group at a point. He stepped up huge. He was really brought in to be the special teams guy.
Mm-hmm. So I would take him back for sure if it was a pretty cheap deal. So yeah, that's that. Just seeing the Kirk Cousins. I mean, it's just crazy to think that after 6 years, like it almost feels like. Not that I like wanted Kirk gone per se, but it's just like I'd been dreaming of the day this would happen for the past few years now, and it's hard to believe that it's real, that it happened. Mm-hmm. And
I thought he would end his career here, to be honest.
Starting tomorrow at 3, Kirk Cousins will no longer be a Viking anymore. It's just a little crazy to think about. He could change his mind. He still has 24 hours and 3 minutes to do it.
I don't think he's changing.
Probably not, but you never know. He could throw a curveball in there. He's still got a day. So that tells me, by definition, for all you Kirk fans, by definition, Kirk Cousins is still a Minnesota Viking right now.
Kirk Cousins goes on Twitter and drops the Wolf of Wall Street speech when Leonardo DiCaprio speaks in front of his entire crew, his staff, and he goes, "I'm not effing leaving. I'm not leaving." I mean, that Twitter would explode. But, yeah, I feel like it's a done deal.
Also, by the way, folks, I lied. It's not 24 hours and 3 minutes. It's 25 hours and 3 minutes. So that does give him an extra hour of leeway. I did the math wrong. You never know.
You
So he could. You never know. But he is still technically a member of the Vikings right now, and for the next day he will be. But then when pen hits paper, not anymore. But for now he is. So that's kind of that. We'll throw that down. We'll throw that back in there. We can look at the spreadsheet a little bit, roster, see if there's anything else the Vikings are maybe going to do. Here's the Vikings roster. I believe it's pretty much as updated as possible. Also, yes, the Vikings do play. Where is it? Why can't I find it?
Week 17.
There it is, right there. Also, for
Not
anyone
officially
wondering,
week 17, but
for anyone wondering, yeah, these week numbers and the opponent numbers don't have any correlation to each other. These are just I just put them in the spreadsheet. Yes, they do play the Falcons at home. Primetime game, gonna be crazy. I said this in the group chat. Imagine week 1, Sunday Night Football, or even Monday Night Football, just like it was with Aaron Rodgers. Kind of like that was.
And Russ, I mean, his first game as a Denver Bronco was against the Seahawks in Seattle.
I don't know if the NFL would do that, but I would buy that. They could. I would think that'd be interesting. A week 1, Falcons come into Minnesota, prime time. Kirk comes back to US Bank Stadium. Could happen. I think it would get a lot of viewers if they did that week 1, but we'll see. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of juicy matchups that could happen week 1. So that's just a possibility at this point. So that's that. Here's the Vikings roster. They've got Sam Darnold, Mullins Hall. We talked about that. Aaron Jones, the new addition. Kind of funny. They still have Myles Gaskin. They signed him to a futures contract. As of right now, they have $57 million. Also, for anyone wondering, don't follow by that cap number because it's about to change in the coming days. So that was pre anything free agency related. So it's about to probably go down, but don't believe that. But the 57 people on the roster is accurate. All this. Also, for anyone wondering, I don't know anything because I'm not an insider. I'm just a fan. This is what my best guess is with Justin Jefferson, is not that fans can fear that Justin Jefferson is going to leave now that Kirk Cousins is gone, but I think that is not even possible. They are not tied at the hip. Justin Jefferson is not married to Kirk Cousins. I think he just wants to see the future plans, but that doesn't mean now that Kirk's gone, they're going to trade him. No way. So some fans need to think that. But really, the reason I think he hasn't signed his contract isn't because he was waiting for this situation to play out, though maybe it was. I think it's because of a guy by the name Jamar Chase. They're both eligible for an extension, and they're both looking to become the highest paid non-quarterback. For sure, highest paid receiver, probably highest paid non-quarterback. And as soon as one of them gets their deal, the other one is probably going to top it right after. So I think it's kind of the Spider-Man meme of the Spider-Mans just pointing at each other because they're just waiting for the other guy to go first. So I don't think there's actually a real holdup with it. I think it'll be just fine. It'll probably carry into the summer, but there's no reason to believe that they're not going to get it worked out. It's more of just a waiting game with who goes first. At least that's what my speculation would be. That's what my prediction would be. To me, that's what makes sense. So we'll see. They also have absolute legend N'Keal Harry still on the roster. We keep looking around here. I mean, there's not that much interesting to point out. Also, now that they signed Grenard, we talked a little about this last night. I think that makes them less likely to draft an edge rusher in the first round. Everything's kind of set up for them to get a quarterback, but edge rusher was still a possibility, but now that they have Grenard, I think those chances significantly just dipped. They'll still draft one, just not in the first round, probably.
He'll be more of a depth rotational guy.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we look around here. I guess there's not a whole lot interesting. We're still waiting to see how the Harrison Smith situation is going to play out, whether he retires, whether he stays with the Vikings at a reduced contract, whether the Vikings cut him and he goes somewhere else on a cheap deal to chase a ring. That could happen. We'll just have to see how it goes. Gives an opportunity for Lewis Seen, even though he's still a bust, so it doesn't matter. Also, is this going to be your new boy since your boy, Mr.
That's probably the greatest news is they moved on from Greg Joseph.
Mr. Greg Joseph is free agent down here. Not been signed anywhere, but the Vikings brought in a kicker this morning, so it does not appear as though it will be Greg Joseph. They'll bring in another kicker to make it a kicking competition in training camp, but still probably won't be Greg Joseph. So, yeah. Oh, also, this is the guy that just went off the board, so Hakeem is gone. He signed with the Browns. Josh Dobbs are not going to bring back. Akers. I wouldn't if they got Akers for cheap, I wouldn't hate that, but
there's no need.
There's no real need for him though. That's why KJ's not coming back in any way, shape, or form. Reisner, there have been discussions, but the Vikings haven't made an offer as of this morning, so we'll see how that goes because they currently don't have a left guard on their roster. So we'll see if that's what they do. We look around here. I guess not a whole lot more. Obviously, Danielle Hunter is kind of still the big name on the board. Arguably, the biggest name free agent that hasn't been signed is Danielle Hunter. I'd have to see a list to be able to really determine that, but he's at least for sure up there at the top of the list. And yeah, so that's kind of it for that. We look over here. Here are the prospects they visited. No changes from last week. They've looked at pretty much every quarterback. Caleb, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix. They're just doing the rounds, so not anything that special to get out of that. Over here, we have predictions. A couple things have happened. I said Baker would re-sign with the Bucs and it'd be at least $27 million per year. It was $33 per year, and yes, he did. In Kirk's next contract, I said 2025 will be fully guaranteed, and it is. Sam Z said exactly one of either Daniil, JJ, or Kirko would not come back. Well, Kirko, it does not appear, will be. So it all pretty much hinges on Daniil. So we'll see how that goes. You said Justin Fields would be the Pittsburgh starting quarterback, and, well, they signed Russ, so it's pretty safe to say that will not happen. You also said Russ would be a Viking, and he's not.
Yeah, we went with Sam Darnold.
I still wouldn't have disliked Russell Wilson, but whatever. Sam Darnold for $10 million versus Russell Wilson for 1.2. I would go Russell Wilson, but
absolutely
whatever. That's people can debate that, but that's just on me. But still, they made a good choice. So that's that. Also, we look back at this. JJ McCarthy will be a second-round pick. No way, no how that will happen anymore, but
it's
I think
possible. It's still possible.
It's possible. I think you were countering this one, weren't you? The JJ would be a first.
I said he'd be a second-round pick, and then Sam countered and said he would be a first-round pick.
Got it. I said somewhere he'd be a top 10 pick, and I still stand by that. I think he'll be a top 10 pick, so I don't disagree with that prediction. Sam O said the Vikings would sign either Russ, Brissett, or Darnold, and, well, they signed Darnold. He said Edina would not win the state hockey tournament, and they did win the Class AA title. Shout out to Matt's former high school, Cathedral. They won the state championship. I never got into the state hockey tournament until this year. This year was the first time I did. It was a good time. I can see myself getting into it in future years. It was a lot of fun watching it.
A lot of debates happen on Twitter, which I think is the best. There's just a bunch of adults arguing about high schoolers.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I'll probably be interested in that in future years. So, good for Cathedral too. Also, he said Kirk would be the starting quarterback for the Vikings this year. Doesn't appear he will be. He said Kirk's contract will be under $40 million per year, and it's 45 average annual value wise. So we'll just have to see. We look over here. I'm currently in the lead at 2 for 2. Sample sizes are small, so don't really take anything out of it. I'm 2 for 2 so far. Sam is 1 for 5, so he's at 20%. You're 0 for 2. Sam Z is 0 for 1. He's had nothing come off, but he said the forbidden name on air last week. And Big Lou has had nothing, so he's technically not even on the board at all because he has no real percentage. And yeah, so that does it for this episode. I don't think there's much
Cap
more
it at the 1 hour.
Let Kwesi keep cooking. Let him keep doing his job.
All right, we'll end it in 10 seconds.
All right.
8,
It's about to hit 1 hour.
7,
All right.
6,
Goodbye, guys.
5,
SKOL
4,
Vikings.